The Russian Revolution in 1917 holds great importance and marked an essential moment, not only in the history of Russia, but also in the power dynamics and the structure of the ongoing World War. Social unrest, shortages of food, and countless military defeats led to the collapse of the Tsarist regime in Russia. The rise of the Bolsheviks, which is a socialist group led by Vladimir Lenin, was made possible by the seizure of power during this revolution. Under the Bolshevik influence, they shifted focus to domestic issues and withdrew Russia from the ongoing war. This paper claims that the Russian Revolution of 1917 resulted in the nation's withdrawal from World War I, since the Bolshevik regime paid more attention to internal stability and control over staying involved in warfare. Although this shift in dynamics initially put the Central Powers in an advantageous position, it was insufficient to lead them to victory due to elements like American involvement and the Allies' sustained resistance. Even before the revolution, Russia was already in bad shape and full of crises. The main reasons for the eventual collapse of the Tsarist regime can be traced to social, economic, and political complaints that had been around for years. Nicholas II, who was the autocrat under the Tsarist regime, failed to address these issues despite the growing unrest among people. McMeekin illustrates Tsar Nicholas II as insane and stubborn, a monarch who could maintain his autocracy with little reforms, but instead stuck with old-fashioned ideas of divine rule. The majority of the nation were peasants struggling to live in poverty, with little to no political existence and representation, whereas the aristocracy and monarchy enjoyed their privileges. As Trotsky states, the inflow of raw labor power to the factories and the greedy scramble for war profits brought everywhere a lowering of the conditions of labor and gave rise to the crudest methods of exploitation. Uneven and harsh working conditions in urban areas led to a politically conscious struggling working class with the help of figures like Vladimir Lenin. Also, World War I immensely sped up the collapse of the Tsarist regime. The Russian military had tremendous casualties. Estimated as 1.5 million soldiers died in the first 2 years of the war. Soldiers were equipped poorly and mostly lacked essentials like rifles, ammunition, and clothing. Meanwhile, people faced problems such as food shortages and high inflation. Nicholas II's decisions to take control of the military did not go as he planned, and the military's failures were also associated directly with him. These situations eventually led to the February Revolution in 1917. There were protests and mutinies in numerous cities. A provisional government was established. However, it could not solve the issue the Tsarist regime created, which was mainly the nation's ongoing involvement in the Great War. This failure favored radical entities, namely the Bolsheviks. Vladimir Lenin promised the Russian people peace, land, and bread. The exact message struggling people in Russia wanted to hear. In October 1917, the Bolsheviks, who gained support from the people, overthrew the provisional government in an almost bloodless coup and started to build the foundations of a socialist state.
After the October Revolution of 1917, the Bolsheviks were under heavy pressure to bring stability to a country exhausted by war and chaos. Quickly exiting World War I was not just an ideological choice. It was actually a strategy to hold on to power. Their slogan "Peace, Land and Bread" had gained them support. But without delivering peace, the other promises would lose meaning, mostly for soldiers and workers who had suffered deeply during the war. Lenin and the Bolsheviks saw the war as a battle between capitalist powers, and staying in it would go against their Marxist view of international socialism. The Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, which was signed in March 1918, was a harsh one, because it cost Russia large territories. Still, it gave Bolsheviks time and space to focus on winning the civil war and rebuilding the country. In the end, leaving the war was a both practical move and political necessity to secure the future of the revolution.
The withdrawal of Russia from World War I, formalized through the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk in 1918, created a dramatic shift in the war's dynamics. Offering the Central Powers a short-term strategic advantage, it but at the end failed to secure their victory. The treaty signed on March 3, 1918, transferred vast territories like Ukraine, Belarus, the Baltics and more into the hands of German control. The immediate consequence was that Germany could relocate over 50 divisions from Eastern to Western Front, which encouraged German High Command to launch the Spring Offensive. As Ivan Mosley explains, the Soviet government accepted these harsh terms primarily to secure a breathing space for internal consolidation amid both civil war and German advances. Even though Germans gained grounds for a brief time in the West, strategic balance shifted against them in the long run. The disappearance of the two front conflicts was countered and neutralized by the increase of American forces. In a January 1918 New York Times article, U.S. Secretary of War Newton D. Baker claimed that the American involvement had hardened the Allies, mitigated German momentum, and prepared a broader counter-offensive once U.S. troops were ready and fully mobilized. Robert Gerward further explains this moment as arguing that Russia's exit from the war gave the illusion of German dominance over Eastern Europe. This illusion fueled a sense of victory is close among German leaders. However, the final outcome of the war would be determined not in the East, but in the West, where Germany's gamble ultimately failed. More significantly, Russia's withdrawal helped trigger wider European instability. Not only did it inspire revolutions and counter-revolutions across Central and Eastern Europe, but it also laid the ideological groundwork for reactionary movements in the interwar period. So we can say in the end, Russia's exit did initially strengthen Germany's military posture for a while, but it also accelerated both the urgency of Allied coordination, particularly American mobilization, and the geopolitical fragmentation that persisted until the war's end.
On the international front, Russia's new Bolshevik government caused fear and instability in Europe. The ideological divide between the East and the West began during this period. As many Western states viewed the Soviet Union as a revolutionary threat, Ingerwart notes the end of World War I did not bring peace but unleashed a new and often more violent conflict. The Versailles Conference excluded Soviet Russia entirely, deepening its isolation from post-war order. While the revolution was still ongoing, Britain, France, and the United States, also Japan, intervened by supporting the Whites. However, this foreign aid was uncoordinated and limited, which ironically helped the Bolsheviks unite more people under their cause. In the long term, this intervention increased mistrust between the Soviet Union and the West. As Gerwars explains, this period laid the foundation for less geopolitical tension and Russia's diplomatic isolation.
In conclusion, the 1917 Russian Revolution not only led to Russia's withdrawal from World War I, but also reshaped the course of the conflict and its aftermath. The Bolsheviks' pursuit of internal stability altered the balance of power, triggered geopolitical instability, and laid the foundations for the ideological divide between East and West. Even though the Central Powers initially benefited, the long-term consequences such as civil war, foreign intervention, and diplomatic isolation highlights how domestic revolutions can deeply transform global political and military outcomes.